On this week's episode of the Crushing Debt Podcast, 9 ways to get out of debt.
Welcome to the Crushing Debt Podcast with your host, Florida attorney Sean Yesner, where our goal is to help you get rid of the financial bullies in your life.
So welcome back to this week's episode of the Crushing Debt Podcast. My name is Sean Yesner, owner and founder of Yesner Law, and I wanted to talk to you this week about different ways to get out of debt. I get a lot of questions on the internet, a lot of questions from clients about how do I get out of debt. So I've talked about all these different things on other episodes of the show, but I brainstormed probably my top 9 ways to get out of debt. Now, before I get into that topic, I do want to bring up again my sponsor, Sam Cohen of Attorneys First Insurance. Sam writes errors and omissions insurance or malpractice insurance for attorneys and title companies all over the country. So if you are an attorney or a title company and it's time to renew your malpractice insurance, or if you know an attorney or title company, maybe the last attorney that you used, maybe the last attorney that you listened to that wasn't me, please refer them over to Sam. You would be doing me and my sponsor a big favor. You can contact Sam at sam@attorneysfirst.com or www.attorneysfirst.com. I put Sam's contact information and the information for Attorneys First Insurance in the notes of every episode. So if you need to know how to spell it, go check out the notes to this episode. It'll be in there. What I wanted to talk about, like I was saying on this week's episode, I brainstormed 9 different ways to get out of debt. Now, all these topics have been in some form or fashion on previous episodes of the show, but I wanted to sort of gather them all in one place and talk about them. So, 9 ways to help you get out of debt. Number 1, talk to the creditor. Give them a call. Every creditor has, if it's a credit card, on the back of the card, or if you get a statement in the mail or something, every creditor should be giving you a telephone number that they can be, where you can contact them and talk to them. And I would give them a call and tell them what your situation is. Tell them your hardship. Now, I would phrase it in terms of a hardship. So, have you lost work? Have you lost your job? Have you had a cut in pay? Have you had a medical issue, a divorce? The loss of a spouse or somebody else that provided you with income. What's the reason that you see the edge of the cliff coming? What's the reason that you need some help? And go ahead and talk to them and say, hey, listen, here's my problem. I lost my job, or I got diagnosed with this medical issue, or my spouse passed away, or I'm getting a divorce, or whatever it is, and I see that I'm going to have trouble making my payments. What can you do to help? A lot of times they can do different things. Some of them I'll get into in this show as well, but a lot of times the creditor can do things to help you. Maybe they'll give you a couple months off in payments. Maybe they'll give you a temporary reduction in your interest rate. Maybe they'll give you some type of plan. But I think my number one tactic, my number one strategy, my number one suggestion is call the creditor and talk to the creditor. My number 2 strategy is you can a lot of times negotiate the debt for a lump sum payment. Now, different creditors have different thresholds. And so my experience is that, for example, American Express, you're typically not going to get less than 80%, 85% of the debt that you owe. And so if you owe American Express $10,000, I would be shocked if they settled for anything less than $8,000 or $8,500 or something in that range, 80 to 85%, probably more than that. So if you owe American Express $10,000, maybe they agree to settle for $9,000. But you never know. I mean, there's certainly been circumstances where I've settled with American Express for much, much lower than that, but we've always had a reason. We've maybe caught American Express in some collection error or some accounting error or something like that. I can recall one case where my client was claiming that his authorization to open the account was forged. Somebody called and impersonated him and opened the account over the phone. And American Express couldn't prove, they didn't have the telephone call, so they couldn't prove how the account was opened. And so you had my client saying, I believe honestly, that he was impersonated in order to open the account, and American Express had nothing to counter that. And so that one we were able to settle for much, much less than 80%. But again, we had certain facts in that case that helped us. Discover, in my experience, will not settle for less than 60%. Now, again, these are all general. These are not guarantees. These are just what I've experienced with these different creditors. But Discover typically won't settle for less than 60%. But certainly there's been times where we've settled for less. Credit unions. Typically, credit unions do not settle, period. They will not take a discount on what's owed, period. Now, I believe the reason for that is that credit unions are owned by the members, the people that bank with the credit union, versus like a Bank of America or a Wells Fargo or a Visa or a Discover or a one of those types of banks. They're owned by shareholders, and they've got different classes of ownership and whatnot. The owners of a credit union are the individual account holders themselves, and so in my experience, credit unions will not settle for a lump sum discount. Now, again, all of these, there are exceptions to every rule. So again, using tactic number one, talk to the creditor. They may negotiate with you, and if they don't, maybe they have another option, like my third option. You can negotiate a payment plan. So I said credit unions don't typically settle for a lump sum, but a lot of credit unions will negotiate a payment plan. And so I had a credit union where my client owed some money, and they refused to take a discount, but they agreed to take the balance that was owed at 0% interest at like $100 a month until the account is paid off. I think it was something like $6,200 that was owed or something like that. So we made like a $500 down payment to bring it below $6,000 that was owed, and then we are paying $100. My client is paying $100 a month for something in the range of 60 months, 5-year plan, and that will pay off the loan in full. Now, you do have to be careful that you negotiate 0% interest on those payments. I did have a client, unfortunately, there was a miscommunication between me and the creditor and the client, and where I had negotiated with the creditor for a 0% payment plan. The creditor was charging interest on that payment plan. And so here's the client paying all this money, and then they ask for a payoff, and they see that very little of the principal got paid down because the creditor was collecting interest. And then I had to get involved, and I had to argue with the creditor. And that one is still pending, so I don't really have a resolution for you on that one. But we're in an argument with the creditor. So make sure you get whatever plan you have with the creditor in writing, and make sure that it says 0% interest, and make sure that it says your payments will pay off the loan within a certain period of time to make sure there's no confusion. But again, a lot of times these creditors will take some type of payment plan if they don't take a lump sum payment, or maybe tactic 3.5. You can combine the two, like I did with the credit union that I was talking about. You can make a down payment, and then you can pay the balance off over time. Or maybe you can do all three of these things. Number 4 that I'm going to talk about here is negotiate a reduction in your interest rate. So if you call Visa and your interest rate is currently 10%, maybe they'll drop it down to 5% or 4%. Or if your interest rate is 12% or 15% or 18%, maybe they'll drop it down to 5 or 6 or 7%. And so you can continue to pay the same amount, but because the interest rate is lowered, what you're paying pays a lot more of the principal balance down. Now, again, what I was saying before is you can combine some of these tactics as well. You can call the creditor, you can pay down a lump sum, you can negotiate the rest over a payment plan with a reduction in interest rate, like I said, hopefully down to 0%. And when you combine a lot of these tactics, you'll get that debt paid off even faster, and you'll typically save yourself a lot of money. So don't be afraid to call the creditor, and don't be afraid to combine some of these tactics to pay off your debt faster. My 5th strategy here is one that I know a lot of people use, but it's not one that I really recommend. And my 5th strategy here is to hire a debt negotiation company. Now, I have a few debt negotiation companies that refer to me, and these are companies that I've vetted, and so these are companies that I refer back to. But what you need to be careful of with a debt negotiation company, a lot of times you will pay the debt negotiation company, and then when they collect enough money, they'll negotiate with the creditor for you. Now, a lot of these companies are not quite ethical. And again, I work with a few of them who I vetted, who I believe are, but you still want to do your due diligence before you work with any of these debt negotiation companies. Now, the problem with the debt negotiation company is they don't settle with the creditors right away. They don't settle with the creditors until you pay them. Now, there was something years and years ago where the debt negotiation companies would collect their fees up front. So you'd be paying them on a monthly basis thinking that they're going to negotiate with the creditor, but really what they're doing is they're taking the money that you're paying them and they're pocketing that money as part of their fee. Once their fee is paid, and then once they have enough to negotiate with the creditors, they will negotiate with the creditors. A lot of these companies don't do it right. A lot of these companies make promises that they can't keep. A lot of these companies really take advantage of unsuspecting or unknowing consumers. And so I would say before you hire a debt negotiation company, do your due diligence. Talk to a couple of different ones. Talk to attorneys. Call me. If you're in Florida, I can help you. If you're not in Florida, I can certainly go over some of the due diligence with you. I can't recommend a debt negotiation company if you're outside of Florida, but I'm certainly willing to jump on a quick call and talk to you about it and go over the due diligence and figure out if this is a company that has any of the red flags that show that they could potentially get you into trouble. Now, one of the things that a lot of these debt negotiation companies do that I don't like is that they advise you to fall behind on your loans in order to get your settlements. Now, here's the pros and the cons there. I agree that the creditor has no incentive to settle with you if the loan is current. Because if the loan is current, you're showing the creditor by making your payments that you can afford to pay back this debt. Now, maybe they negotiate with you in an exceptional circumstance. You lost your job, you got a divorce, you had one of these other conditions or situations happen to you where you are currently able to make payments, but you see the edge of the cliff coming. Maybe you may not have to be behind in order to settle with these creditors. But a lot of times, if you're current, the creditor is going to think to themselves, well, if you're current and you're able to make payments, why would we, the creditor, take less on our loan? Now, here's the interesting issue is I will never tell you to fall behind intentionally on a debt in order to get it settled. What I will tell you is what I just told you, that if the loan is current, it is going to be more difficult to settle with the creditor, and then you can make the decision whether you want to fall behind or not. Because the problem is, if you fall behind, then the lawsuits start. And when the lawsuits start, it's really, really difficult to dig out of that hole. Attorney's fees get added, the pressure gets dialed up. You know, in a lot of these cases where people have a very, very legitimate reason for falling behind on their debt. They got a divorce, they lost their job, a wage earner died, something like that. Everybody has a legitimate reason. I don't think people just go out there and say, I'm going to run up credit cards and then never pay them back intentionally. I really don't think that's happening very often. So a lot of the people that fall behind on their credit card payments have a legitimate reason for doing so. The problem is that legitimate reason does not rise to the level of a legal defense that we can use to stop the collection action. So what you really need to be careful of is if these companies are telling you to fall behind intentionally in order to negotiate with the creditors, while that might be true, they're not telling you the rest of the story, which is the consequences that could happen if and when you do fall behind. So again, idea number 5, when you talk to or hire a debt negotiation company, do your due diligence, be careful. If they're telling you intentionally to fall behind, there's a host of other questions you might want to ask, like, what's the time between when I hire you and when these debts will get settled? If any of these debt negotiation companies are giving you guarantees, that's a huge red flag. Like I've told you at the very beginning, and like I tell you in nearly every episode, I can't guarantee anything. So while I have my averages with the various creditors, that's not a promise. I can't promise you what they would settle at. So beware of some of those red flags when you hire a debt negotiation company. Now, I do want to take a minute or two and differentiate what I do at Yesner Law with a debt negotiation company. So I can help you settle your debt, and I have a lot of clients that pay me to help them settle their debt with the creditor. But here's the difference. I'm going to negotiate with the creditor, and then when we come to some type of deal, I'm going to run that deal by you. If you agree with that deal, at that point, you owe me money to settle the debt. Now, again, the way that I do this is I do take a small flat fee up front, and then I negotiate, and then I take a percentage of what I save you. But after you pay me that flat fee up front, which a lot of times will include defense of the collection lawsuit, but once you pay me that flat fee up front, you don't owe me anything until I settle the debt. So I'm not a debt negotiation company where I'm telling you to pay me every month and then I'm going to group all those funds together and then I'm going to negotiate with the creditor. I leave that responsibility to you. I leave it to you to maybe tighten the belt so you can save up some more money so that when it comes time to actually settle with them and I strike an offer for a lump sum payment plan, you have some kind of war chest built up where you can then just stroke a check and settle with the creditor, or maybe make a down payment, or maybe use that money to fund the monthly plans. So the difference between me and a debt settlement company is I'm not going to ask you to make me monthly payments. I'm going to settle, and then I'm going to tell you what the settlement is. If you can pay it, great, we're settled. If you can't pay it, then maybe we move on to one of these other tactics. Speaking of, option number 6, tactic number 6, get a consolidation loan. Now, I know there's another very high-profile person whose name I'm not going to mention that talks about getting out of debt on a regular basis. And most of you would know him. He's very involved in his church, and he runs seminars and certifies people to run seminars from their church or religious organization to help people get out of debt. I'm not going to talk about that guy, but one thing that I do agree with him with is he says you don't incur debt to get out of debt. So my 6th strategy here is a consolidation loan. And again, it's not something that I really endorse unless the conditions are right. And what a consolidation loan is you would go to a consolidation company, and from what I hear, Discover is a good company to give consolidation loans. And you would say, hey, listen, Discover, I've got $5,000 to this creditor and $5,000 to that creditor and $10,000 to this creditor and $5,000 to that creditor. So $25,000 total, and I'm paying 18% interest on this one and 15% interest on that one and 15% on that one and 12% on that one. And what Discover says is, okay, fine, we're going to give you a $25,000 loan and we're going to give you that loan at 8% interest, and you can use that loan to pay off the $25,000 in credit card debt that you have. And so we're consolidating that $25,000 of debt into one debt, typically at a lower interest rate. At that point, the consolidation loan sounds like a fantastic idea. But where the consolidation loan can really get you into trouble is once you pay down those credit cards and you get rid of that 25, once you transfer that 25 from the credit cards to the consolidation loan, don't use your credit cards again. Let me say that one more time. Once you consolidate that debt, whether it be $25,000 in my made-up example or whatever the number is, once you consolidate all that debt into one loan at a lower interest rate, rip up the credit cards, shred the credit cards, lock them away where you can't get them, give them to somebody else who won't give them back. Do something where those credit cards are not in your wallet, because the last thing you want to have happen is you take $25,000 of credit card debt, you transfer it to a consolidation loan, and then you go back to your credit cards and you run up another $25,000 in debt. That's what's meant by you don't incur debt to get out of debt. Because if you do it that way, you go from $25,000 of credit card debt to $50,000 in debt, now made up of another $25,000 of credit card debt and the $25,000 of consolidation loan. So a consolidation loan is a great way to get out of debt, but you really need to be disciplined and you really need to be careful that once you get that consolidation loan and you consolidate all your debt, you get rid of the credit cards so that you don't run them up again and in essence double your debt and dig yourself into a deeper hole. And so that's my 6th tactic. My 7th tactic, ask family or friends for help. Now this is one that is really, really difficult, probably one of the most difficult. As people, we don't like to be reliant on other people. We don't like to feel like an embarrassment. We don't like to feel like a failure. But what I'm here to tell you is a lot of your friends and family want you to do well. They want you to succeed. And so to have a conversation with a friend or with a family member, a close friend or a family member, and say, hey, look, I'm in trouble. I need some money. And if that friend or family member has money, there are things we can do to protect both of you. Maybe you've got some equity in your home and your friend or family member will give you money as a second mortgage against your home to get out of debt. I mean, if your friend or family member has money sitting in a CD in a bank earning 1% interest or a 0.5% interest or a 1/4 point interest, and you offer to pay them even 3% interest by loaning that money to you, they're better off. It's a win-win. Now, I would also caution that borrowing money from friends and family members is a dangerous idea, because if you don't pay that money back, now you've got bad feelings, you've got more embarrassment, so it's something you really want to consider, and it's something you really want to consider carefully. But if you've got friends or family members that have investments that are not paying very much, and you want to offer them a higher interest rate to have them loan you their money so that you can get out of debt, to me, that seems to be a win-win for everybody. So it's something you want to be careful of, but it is a tactic that will help you get out of debt. My 8th tactic, next to last tactic, is to file bankruptcy. Now again, along the lines of asking friends and family for money, bankruptcy can be very embarrassing. And so I understand why a lot of people don't want to file it. However, bankruptcy basically gives you that second bite at the apple. We recognize as a nation, as a country, within the Constitution, within our laws, within the bankruptcy code, we recognize that a lot of times bad things happen to good people. And that's what bankruptcy is for. It's a way to reorganize. It's a way to restructure your debts. It's not something you can file on an annual basis unless you're trying to commit fraud or a crime or taking advantage of somebody. And then, if you want to risk trying to be a multiple bankruptcy filer, go for it. But typically bankruptcy is something by law you can only file every 8 years to get a discharge if it's a Chapter 7 to a Chapter 7 case. I do have, by the way, a blog on my website, so if you go to the Yesner Law website or even just type in Yesner Law time between filings, I have a blog post on my website that tells you the different times. So it's 8 years, Chapter 7 to 7, but I think it's only 2 years or 4 years if you're going from a Chapter 13 to a Chapter 13, and then it's different time frames if you filed a Chapter 13 and now you want to file a Chapter 7, or if you filed a Chapter 7 and now you want to file a Chapter 13. But again, all those different time frames are contained within that blog. And while I get that bankruptcy can be very embarrassing, like I said, to me, as a bankruptcy attorney, it is simply a tool that people use to get out of bankruptcy. So, yes, I understand why it's embarrassing. Yes, it's public record, but at the same time, it relieves you of liability. What a lot of people will say is, well, but doesn't bankruptcy hurt my credit? Well, yeah, bankruptcy hurts your credit, but so does not paying back your creditors. So does being sued by your creditors. So bankruptcy is really not going to wreck your credit as much as any of these other options. And a lot of times, if people are coming to me saying, hey, I need help getting out of debt, the only way that you're going to improve your credit score is to pay the debt off in full. So some of these other options, negotiating with the creditors, hiring the debt negotiation companies, those solutions are going to hurt your credit. There's really no way to get you out of debt for less than what you owe and preserve your credit. Maybe the consolidation loan helps because you're paying off the debt in full and then you're paying off the consolidation loan. But a lot of these other strategies are going to hurt your credit. So don't let credit be the determining factor as to whether you decide to file bankruptcy or not. My last tactic, my 9th tactic, I think is the most dangerous, probably even beyond hiring a debt settlement company. And I struggled in preparing for this episode in even calling it a tactic or not. But it's 9 ways to get out of debt. This is the 9th way. And the 9th way is luck. It's hitting the lottery. It's waiting for that inheritance. It's waiting for that big deal to come in at work and pay you that extra money. While I don't want to talk anybody out of having hope, I want everybody to have hope. I want everybody to understand and know that things are going to get better. But I want that hope to be realistic. And so if you're playing the lottery and thinking you're going to hit the lottery, number one, you're not changing any of your money habits. But number two, how often does someone hit the lottery? Using that as a strategy, which I've had clients that want to use that as a strategy. So it is a real thing. But it's one of those things that the chances of it working on a regular basis are very, very rare. Typically what happens is people will walk into my office and say, well, when X happens, I own my own business, and when this contract comes in, that's going to give me enough money that I can get out of this debt. When XYZ happens, that's going to give me enough money that I'm going to be able to get out of this debt. Or someone walks into my office and says, unfortunately, such and such family member passed away, and when I get my inheritance, I'll be able to get out of this debt. Well, the problem there is a lot of times the inheritance they get is a lot less than what they thought they'd get, or the inheritance they get is not cash, it's things, and so it's not things that they can sell for a lot of cash. And so I would say use a lot of these other strategies to get out of debt. I mean, certainly if you know you've got a big inheritance coming, let's talk, because creditors, your creditors, the deceased person's creditors cannot get at their estate typically. They can't go after life insurance policies typically. They can't go after any of that kind of stuff. But if you owe debt and you get an inheritance, certainly your creditors can go after that inheritance that you receive. There is some case law out that if you inherit an IRA, that IRA is no longer exempt because it's inherited. Now, if you have an IRA that's exempt, the creditors can't touch it. But if you inherit an IRA, that may not be exempt under the various laws. So you really got to be careful. I want you to have hope. I want you to know. I want you to understand that things are definitely going to get better. But I don't think it's the best idea to rely on that when you're trying to get out of debt. So that's it for this week's episode. My 9 ways to get out of debt. First, talk to the creditor. Second, negotiate the debt for a lump sum. Third, negotiate a payment plan. Fourth, negotiate a reduction in interest rate. Fifth, hire a debt negotiation company. Sixth, get a consolidation loan. 7, ask friends or family for help. 8, file bankruptcy. 9, rely on the lottery or that extra work day or that inheritance to come in. Those are my 9 best ways to get out of debt. Obviously, not in order of preference. Again, bankruptcy is not always the best option, but we can talk about it. Negotiating with the creditor may or may not be a good option if you don't have the means to pay the lump sum settlement or the monthly settlements. So each of these different tactics has their pros, has their cons. If you find yourself in debt and struggling and wondering how to get out of that debt, number 1, give us a call. We can help talk you through it. If we can't represent you, we can maybe find an attorney wherever you're located, whatever state you're located in, to represent you. Second, don't give up hope. I have seen plenty of people that have gotten in debt, gotten out of debt, gotten in debt again, got out of debt again. So don't lose hope. We can get you out of debt. Even in a worst case scenario, we can eliminate the debt for you, or find a strategy to eliminate the debt, or find some plan to get that debt eliminated. So don't give up hope. Don't give up the positive attitude that you can get out of debt. There may be some other tactics we can use that I haven't listed here to help you as well, but I think that'll do it for this week's episode of the Crushing Debt Podcast. Thank you, everybody, for your listening, for your continued listening, for your support of the show. A great way that you can support the show is to support our sponsor by introducing Sam at Attorneys First to other attorneys or title companies that you know that are in need of errors and omissions or malpractice insurance. But that'll do it for this week's episode. I hope that at the end of the month you have more money, rather than at the end of the money you have more month. And I look forward to talking to you in next week's episode of the Crushing Debt Podcast.
If you have questions that you think would make a great topic for a future episode, please email Sean or connect with us on social media. Sean Yesner and Yesner Law, PL, are Florida licensed attorneys. The information contained in this week's episode is not a substitute for legal advice. Your situation may differ, especially if you are located somewhere other than the state of Florida. If you have questions, please contact our office or contact a local attorney. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Crushing Debt Podcast.